Hello and welcome to American Public University Senior Seminar, the 2018 conference, presented by Clint Burton. Today I'll be sharing with you my critical review of The Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder, written by Richard Louv. So in today's agenda, the presentation is going to cover the author, Richard Louv, some basic information about him, what is nature deficit disorder, what is causing children to stay indoors, what nature does for children, the critical review of The Last Children in the Woods, and any closing statements that I may have. So Richard Louv is the author of The Last Child in the Woods. Richard Louv has been somewhat of a successful writer. He's written for major corporations such as New York Times, the Washington Post, the Times of London, Orion, and Outside Magazine. Along with writing for these newspapers and magazines, Louv also has been an advocate for getting children outdoors. He is the co-founder and chairman of the Children of Nature Network. And these aspects of where Richard Louv has done research or looked over studies and written for these magazines and newspapers and things like that kind of start to blend into The Last Child in the Woods. So that was a very interesting thing to find out and see. So what is nature deficit disorder? To start off, Louv makes it very clear he is not creating a medical diagnosis of what he is discussing in his book. So the issue with this is nature deficit disorder. When anyone sees disorder, a lot of times people coordinate that with a diagnosis, and Richard Louv makes sure that he states in his book that he is not a medical profession, and he just wants to express that this is just what he has identified this issue as. So it's not a diagnosis of a medical issue, it's just not a diagnosis, but it is a description of an issue that is continuing to go on. So to continue where we're going, Louv does express that nature deficit is, however, when children slowly stop going outdoors. So this is becoming a more and more common thing in today's society, with technological advances and certain concerns that parents have for children's safety, but those things will be something that we discuss later in this presentation. So Louv states that the last 3 generations there has been an increase in time spent indoors as opposed to a decrease in time spent in nature. So what are causing children to stay indoors? Well, like I said before, modern technology, such as video games, cell phones, and things like that, are really starting to draw children indoors. And another thing that seems to be a leading cause, according to Richard Louv, is the fear of a child abduction. But he also goes on to state that since the 1970s, there has been a decrease in child abductions in the public area, but there's been an increase in children abductions from their homes. And this is because he has found that research has proven that the people that abduct children the most are people the family knows. So it's going to be the children being abducted from home as opposed to being out in public. So what is nature doing for the children? Well, it helps children learn basic engineering skills as they build forts, tree houses, and get outside and really broaden their imagination. Research has shown that teachers that hold classes at both outdoors and indoors, the students get better grades when they go for the end of year testing scores, or in general, better scores in their testing. By going outside, it teaches the children some of that appreciation for what nature provides for us. So I know I can relate to this because what nature does for children is at the age of 7, I was taking fishing at a local lake to catch bluegill. That day was the day not only I found a new hobby, but a passion for what lakes and streams have living in them and can provide for us. Over 20 years later, I still love fishing, and I plan to take my children fishing when they get older, or when they get old enough, because I want them to learn the same lessons that I learned as a child. And it's not lessons that I teach them; it's what they learn by being outdoors. Um, to get back on the basic engineering skills, building tree houses teaches how to use basic hand tools. Things like hand saws, tape measure. It teaches you how to measure, to judge tree size compared to human body. It'll teach you things like 3D geometry. These are all things that Richard Louv discusses in his book, as well as what materials can structurally sound, which ones are structurally sound, I'm sorry, and how to build a structural sound support system such as doors and roof supports. It also shows you learn as you build a treehouse that you can slope the roof and rainwater will wash off instead of sitting on the top of the treehouse. So, to get into the critical review, The Last Children in the Woods was a title that really struck me. It struck a chord inside me as to why someone felt this way. To me, I thought when I seen that title, I was like, why does the author feel like he has to write a book titled this? But as Richard goes on to explain, he states the last 3 generations again has become increasingly bound indoors. I instantly got defensive because I lived outdoors as a child in rural South Carolina, but Love went on to explain how this was going about, how video game consoles are getting more attention of the children by the video games that they release with these consoles, new cell phone technology, cell phones getting smaller and being able to use the internet on these things. But that is not the only cause of the increased amount of children going outdoors. Love seemed to be very adamant about the fact that parents are the leading factor of children staying indoors. This was surprising to me because my mother always told me when I was younger to go outside and not to come home until it was just before dark. Love explained his theory by telling the reader that parents were becoming overprotective of their children by starting as early as the 1970s, and this was due to an increase in child abductions during that time frame. As a new parent, I could see how this was a worry to me that is my worst nightmare. My child being taken away from me is the worst thing that could ever happen to me at this point in time in my life. But yet again, Love explains that though children abductions have decreased since the 1970s, there has been an overall increase by 60% of children being abducted from their own home, and that's because the fact that children are being confined to the spaces in their homes, and that's where people that the family know are going to abduct the children. Now, to get on to the continued with the critical review, so now that we have some basic understanding of what Richard Louv was trying to explain and his theories as to what he was trying to get out and provide to the reader, the overall presentation of the book was kind of like a third person sharing information, statistical information they gained from research. That's kind of how I picked up on how he was presenting the book. But Love explains that education is requiring children to stay in schools longer than previous generations. This is a disagreement for me because I have a disagreement with this because this isn't a society thing. This is more of a thing of society forcing them to stay in school longer. It's a different time economically. So meaning that 4 generations ago, it wasn't uncommon for children to not graduate high school. My grandfather, for example, he dropped out of school at 3rd grade. Never really fully understood how to read. But that's because the economy required most of them during that time frame to work on farms or get jobs to earn money to help the family be able to eat. There was just larger families back in those generations. Farming also was a more common way of life 3 or 4 generations ago, but today, if you do not have a large farm operation, it is not cost effective to try and have a family farm anymore. And that's just it. Financially, you can't run a farm that's a small operation because it just costs so much. So another disagreement that I have with Louv is the fact that blaming parents for the indoors increase. Time and time again, Louv explains how that his children were outdoors playing, but he also mentions how he was also with them when they played. See, with time, everything changes, and yes, it still is possible for people to go hiking, for you to go to lakes and streams and things like that, but what is getting harder to do is going into natural parks and reserves due to excessive entry fees. Some of these parks require you to pay like a $20 entry fee per car, and that's a little excessive. With the human population increasing by the second, it is getting harder and harder to find a place to live that has large backyards for children to play in. So it's almost like we have to pay to go outside with our children, and that seems to be unjust. Why should we have to pay to enjoy nature naturally as it is offered to us? All in all, The Last Children in the Woods was packed full of information Richard Louv gained from his travels across the U.S. and doing his research for the book and for various other things. It has been very eye-opening to it has been very eye-opening to an issue that seems to continue to grow at an alarming rate. So, how does this all roll? How does this all combine into an environmental study, you may ask? Well, the simplest way that I can figure out how to explain it is if there is not no one around that is interested in the environment or keeping it around for future generations, then the environment will disappear for good. According to Richard Louv, the best way to do this is to teach our children at a young age how to love the environment and teach them how important it is to keep the environment. Louv R. 2005. This will lead children to grow up to want to help protect the environment and to keep it around for future generations. The fear is, from this book accordingly, is that no one will want to preserve or protect the environment in the years to come. This is because it's very likely that nature will be forgotten. And not only forgotten, but why it's so important to stay around. This is all due to children staying indoors and it becoming an increasingly alarming issue. So I hope you enjoyed my presentation. This book was a very good read. I think if you have some spare time and you want to learn some more statistical things about the environment and how it's changing for children and why children are going indoors instead of outdoors, this would be a great book to pick up. So thank you for staying around for my presentation, and I hope you have a great day.